Hey, how's it going? Thanks for joining me. One of the things that I get requested all the time is to have people on that have broken into cybersecurity and talk about their journey, talk about the things that they went through and all the different methods that they use and all those kinds of things so that you better understand what it's like to try to get into cybersecurity from a beginner's point of view. So, with that being said, I have a guest that I'm really excited to have on, and I think you're going to get a lot of insight from the different questions that we're going to ask and talk about, and just kind of the overall perspective of somebody that went through something that you're trying to go through right now. So, let's go ahead and bring on our guest here. And so we have Allison here. Hey, Allison, how's it going?
Hey John, I'm doing great, thanks.
Awesome. Really excited to have you on. I think this will give a lot of insight to people that are in the same kind of situation that you were in, and hopefully they get a lot out of this. So
Yeah, absolutely.
awesome. Okay, so cool. So let's start with the first question here. So, first question, what's your current job title? And just what are some of the overall job responsibilities that you have right now?
Okay, perfect. So I am a information security and compliance analyst one for Costco wholesale or Costco IT. And so some of my responsibilities, specifically within that department, we have a lot of departments. We have about 300 people right now between all of the InfoSec departments at Costco. But for my department specifically, I'm in the vendor risk management department. And so our focus is to assess the potential risks that are basically that could compromise our company through any sort of third party vendor that we work with.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, it's funny because GRC kind of in general is kind of one of those areas that doesn't always get a lot of publicity in the cybersecurity aspect of things. A lot of people think of like the SOC analyst or, a security analyst, kind of a more generic title of a SOC analyst or a security engineer or something like that, where they're, doing a massive amount of this technical stuff, but they don't talk a lot about the GRC side of things, which is interesting because that is a booming area, an emerging area that is really growing with all of the regulations and things like that that are emerging, really, right?
Oh, absolutely. The department, yeah, I would say we see new departments birthed into GRC more rapidly than probably a lot of the other areas that you'd expect. Just basically based on what you're saying, with a lot of different areas worldwide and even just state by state in the United States having different regulations in place that we need to make sure we're in compliance with so we can do business.
Awesome. So I know that somebody's going to ask this question or want to know the answer to this question, but your current role, so this is your first cybersecurity role, right?
Yes.
So are you working remote? Are you in the office? Are you hybrid? What's that look like?
Costco is based out of Washington State. So currently, they're still in a model where they require 20% on site, but they are kind of following suit with the Microsoft and Amazon trend. And so in January, we're going to be required to be on site 3 days a week. But they've been pretty firm that it will probably stay at three. And so that is going to probably cause a little bit of uproar. But for the most part, I think people understand why. It's just a big focus on the fact that teams do collaborate well when we're able to meet and gather in person. But then there's a lot of our job, obviously, that's done online, and so being at home works too. So that's where we're headed in January. So it's more of a hybrid model.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's one thing that's really interesting because I look back, pre-COVID and pre all of the pandemic and all this stuff, and remote work for like cybersecurity jobs in general wasn't really like this thing. Like people generally accepted that they're going to have to go work in the office. And if they have a remote job or they had remote opportunities, it was, obviously a benefit or a kind of a unique situation that you could enjoy. But I remember interviewing for companies like large companies that, theoretically should have had the technology to allow remote work, but they didn't allow it. They were just like, nope, we're not going to do it. So whether that's through experience of not being successful with it or whatever the case was. And then all this, the pandemic and everything really kind of changed a lot of stuff, at least for the last couple years. And it sounds like your company is kind of following suit with a lot of other companies where They've learned that it works on a partial basis for what they're doing, or they just prefer that partial model for whatever reason. So really, really interesting and great insight for everybody, because I always get that question is, I want a remote cybersecurity job. I want to be fully remote and I don't want to go into the office. And so it's just kind of like a little bit of insight that those jobs, at least for a full remote perspective, don't really exist that much, especially as we're going back to this kind of partial on-site setup for a lot of companies.
Yeah, and I would say for anyone that's looking for that first role, if you kind of, put yourself in that corner of only looking for something that's remote, it's going to be a lot more difficult. Obviously, it's not impossible, but it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to stand out and for you to be able to um, show your worth, bring value, do all of those kind of things. Because the market is so saturated with individuals that want to work remote. And so I think if you are in a position, I understand some people are not in a position to move potentially, even temporarily, or kind of structure their lives around that. But especially for that first role, as you can start to get some things to build your resume, if you have that ability to go at least hybrid, I would say that's definitely for me. I think how I was able to land this role for sure.
Yeah, it's funny too, because like the whole remote thing, it's like it's flexible, right? So that's a nice aspect of being remote. But then the company that means companies can hire from wherever they want. So then instead of that smaller talent pool that maybe you can compete with, now you got to compete against everybody. And, especially if you're like just starting out, like do you really want to compete with people that have like multiple years of experience? Like that's going to be a tough challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's go on to the next question here. So, looking at your current job, and we kind of already briefly touched on this a little bit. So, in the risk space, what are some of the knowledge areas or skills that you think are likely to help somebody be successful in that similar kind of role?
So looking at my current role, as you previously mentioned, in kind of more of the GRC area, so a lot of governance, risk and compliance, mine specifically in compliance. Uh, Being familiar with those areas is definitely a plus. I wouldn't say that that has to be all that you're comfortable in. I think that, especially as far as my department goes, what they're pushing towards is that we're basically security experts over a wider pool, and having maybe limited depth in some areas, as we don't have to necessarily be as technical. I know for me, like when I attended a boot camp, so I didn't have any technical experience prior to getting this role. I've been a hairdresser, I've been a kids pastor, and then I found myself needing to get into an industry that had some potential for growth. And so, in going to a boot camp and experiencing more technical aspects, that part made me particularly a bit uncomfortable because it wasn't my strong suit. Not that I wasn't interested in learning more about it, and I still am. But I would say, as long as you feel comfortable, kind of in the wide arena of security, I think that companies will support you as you go deeper. And so I have found that here, where I came in. Part of the entry point for me to get into this role is I did a risk assessment, just something more kind of big, open, and broad, just a risk assessment, as kind of like a way to kind of get onto the next level of interviews. And being able to showcase skills in that way. And then after I've been here, they now have a lot of great pathways for you to take if you want to stay more in the compliance realm. If you want to even go, say you're passionate about PCI, we have departments that focuses specifically on PCI compliance, and they travel. So there's like all these different things that you could do. But I would say once you get into a role, the opportunity, I've got some friends that are now part of the red team. The opportunities to move around once you get into this space, it is so, so much simpler. So simple. And so I would encourage anyone, if you have work experience working with people, you're passionate about security, consider GRC, because that is a great way to get in the door, to start building your resume, to build relationships where you're at. And then I would say probably a year or two down the line, you're going to start being able to hone in on those areas that really get you excited about security.
Yeah, it's funny with GRC and kind of like the compliance and risk aspect. Another thing that people don't necessarily always see, like especially when they're starting out, is at the high levels, the strategic levels, the just the higher level positions, even like in the entry level positions, a lot of what we do is risk based. So there's a direct correlation between those skills, and then also the GRC aspect, the compliance aspect. That's starting to get intertwined with a bunch of different positions. It's not just a GRC analyst that has to do compliance tasks. It's the SOC analyst, the SOC team lead, the every other role, the penetration testing teams. They're all touched by GRC aspects, and especially if you want to get into a leadership role, it's like you're gonna have to develop those GRC skills. You can't just not have them because they are even more intertwined with those kinds of responsibilities. So I think it's personally a really good area to get experience in, whether that's initially or later on, because most people are going to have to develop that skill at least to some extent. So
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of individuals have work experience working with people somewhere in their resume. And I talk to people all day long. I have to interview, business owners, product owners, and then I'm reaching out to different vendor contacts. And being able to have the soft skills to kind of go alongside any of your technical skills in this role makes you hugely beneficial to an organization.
yeah, absolutely. So you'd say the soft skills definitely have come in handy in that role.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I would say what they told me pretty early on is we're kind of like the police in some respects
Yeah,
when we go after people. Not go after people, that sounds wrong, but when we're going and looking for more information on things. And
provide
so
oversight, inquiries.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so the more that you can be like, hey, I'm here to support you. I'm with you in this, and this is, the role I'm going to play. And so being able to have those soft skills definitely helps.
Absolutely. Yeah. The days of being able to get into a tech job and hide in a closet or something are just they're not there. You can't do that in like almost every role. So we kind of talked about this already. So before you started working in cybersecurity, you said you were a hairdresser, right? That was the
Correct.
immediate previous job. Let's talk about that a little bit. Just when you made the decision to get into cybersecurity, right? Did you completely leave that profession? Did you kind of do it part time or do that full time and then start trying to get into cybersecurity, or how did that work out?
Right. So I was a hairdresser for many years. And then after that, I actually stepped into working for the church and I worked with kids. And then, kind of over COVID and all of those changes that took place, that job changed a bit and just found myself needing to make a career change. And so I was definitely still able to continue working full time while I was attending a boot camp. And so basically, in figuring out or choosing like wide security, is I took a career assessment of just like all of these other jobs I've kind of fallen into. I haven't been able to really like focus on something and be like, what would I love to do? What gets me excited? And so I took a career assessment that had me focusing on like, okay, I really care about people. I know that. And I care about safety. And then when it gave me just a huge list of things that could be opportunities, there was a lot of no's. Just like, no, I'm not a police officer. No, I'm not a social worker. And so when I saw cybersecurity, it was something that I just didn't really know a lot about. And so when I started to research it and learn more about the industry, I just thought it was so interesting because it is all over the news if you're looking for it. And so when doing that and researching schools, I just knew for me it was going to work better to basically hit something hard for 10 months and just learn as much as I could and then start applying. And so I was definitely able to still work. You definitely will have to give up, evenings of, binging Netflix and going out or whatever, but it will be worth it for sure.
Yeah, it's everybody kind of has their own path as far as how they, especially if they're switching from different careers, how they kind of approach that. With me, I ended up completely getting out of my sales job, and then I went back to school full time, kind of accelerating the process. Um, but even I didn't even finish my degree before I started working in cybersecurity, and so I was trying to juggle that as well. And working in general and doing the school stuff or the boot camp stuff is like super difficult, especially if you have a whole bunch of other priorities or responsibilities or things that you have to do. And so that's awesome that you were able to juggle that and see that finish line and get through that process.
Yeah, I think that especially now, there's just like a lot of different opportunities that will suit different people. So I knew for me, in entering into this, it would take much longer to fully return to college, just in needing to secure my associates and my bachelor's. And that's one of the reasons I came across you also on YouTube, is just looking at like, okay, like I just need to hear some stories of some people and their different pathways and see if this is possible. Because sometimes you'll obviously there's a lot of information out there that's not necessarily true. And so it's like, hey, is this real? Is there real stories out there? And it is. And I can tell you personally too that members of my team, uh, there's buyers, there's individuals that used to work in marketing. I mean, so many diverse backgrounds. So I would say if there's even ways in whatever you're doing now or within your company that you can start to kind of put your feelers out there on how to gain some experience, that could pertain to this, and then maybe move around within your current organization, maybe even if the teams or the roles aren't specifically there yet. It probably will be in a couple of years. But just, yeah, any experience that you can gain where you're at now, is going to help you too.
Yeah, and you said something about having to get the associates and the bachelors. So do you have a degree at all right now, or just the boot camp training?
Yep, no degree. The boot camp training is what I have. Yep. And then with going to work for Costco, before I was offered a full time position, I actually got in as an intern. And so a lot of the other interns there were recent graduates, or were currently attending a university. And so it was kind of fun for me to do the process alongside them. And then from that internship, I was able to secure the full time position.
That's awesome because I know a lot of people are gonna we're gonna be curious about that if they heard that. So there you go, people. There's lots of different paths that you can go. You don't just have to go one specific way. So that's awesome. So kind of mentioned this a little bit. So you talked about getting initially interested in cybersecurity based on the career assessment. I guess, first of all, with that career assessment, did it like literally call out cybersecurity?
Yes, on a pretty extensive list, like I said before, it called out cybersecurity, and so that was kind of what just absolutely jumped off the page to me as something to investigate. And I didn't really know anybody else working in the field either. I knew like kind of a someone who knew somebody else. And so pretty quickly after I became interested in it, I went and I interviewed that person and just asked for just their raw feedback on, what they loved about it and what they didn't love about it, because they've been in the industry for more than 20 years. And so I knew that they would have a pretty good, breadth of knowledge to be able to share with me. And so definitely networking and finding more people that you can, connect with it's huge. I know there's a lot of people that don't love networking, and I understand that can really make people uncomfortable, but it is really valuable to be able to learn from other people's experiences and make connections through other people, because you never know, there could be something opportunity wise that comes up from
Yeah. Honestly, like I'm amazed that the career assessment actually like called cybersecurity specifically out. I would have expected it to call like IT or something out, like something more generic. So the fact that that's starting to show up in these career assessments is pretty interesting. That's pretty great.
that. Yeah, it was cool.
So moving on from there, when you were first starting to learn about cybersecurity and kind of get trained up, I know you had mentioned a boot camp, but what all went into that process? Like, how did you pick that boot camp? Um, let's talk about that.
Yeah, definitely. Uh, so the career assessment I took, actually, the podcast that I got it from, they actually sponsor or are sponsored by a boot camp. It's called Bethel Tech. And so the curriculum that they utilized was WazU. And so I looked into that, very credible, really good content. And so after interviewing there and going through that process, I think it was December of 2021, I decided I wanted to do it, and I started in February of 2022. So it was a pretty quick kind of a jump. But the program began in like February of that year, and then it wrapped up at the end of October of that year. And so while I was in that, it basically was just kind of, yeah, definitely like college. It was just heavy kind of fire hose information of just different elements. And then I tried to just accompany it with as much YouTube learning as I could, different channels to, if we're learning Python, then I wanted to follow it up with some other channels that would support Python so that I could just kind of dive deep into it and learn more about it. So it definitely was like a pretty intensive kind of 10 months until we wrapped it up at the end. And then from there, it was definitely just developing your resume, which can be tricky, especially if you feel like you're kind of starting from zero a little bit, if you don't have as much to put on there. So there's a lot of helpful resources there. My bootcamp program did help me initially start to craft the resume and develop, how I should approach different companies looking for different opportunities. Um, and so when I started applying, probably like a lot of people feel, there was definitely a lot of, ghosting and white noise and not a lot coming back. And so learning from those experiences of trying to make every role that you're applying for, not just like cast like a wide net, but have it be something where you really are intentional about going through the job posting, make sure you understand it, and then taking as much of the posting as you can and translating it into your resume so you're speaking to that role specifically and how your strengths play into it. And I think that that brings a lot of value. So I would say when it came to applying, I probably applied to maybe 40 roles total, something like that. And then got 2 interviews from that. And then one of them was the role of Costco.
That's awesome. You talked about when you were going through your boot camp, trying to use other resources like YouTube to help kind of understand the material or further kind of ingrain it. Was there any other resources that you used, labs, books, anything like that, like specifically that comes to mind?
We utilized TryHackMe a bit in trying to develop a lot of those skills. Our final was actually focused on not participating in a capture the flag challenge, but we actually had to build one. And so that, um, what I appreciate about that, because it was so uncomfortable, was that kind of speaks to the industry just in general of you need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable and just know that you're not gonna know everything. You are not gonna know the solution, and so you have to be comfortable researching, getting scrappy, and just kind of figuring it out. And so there's a lot of really great free resources out there. I utilized IT Pro TV for a little while, kind of in between when I got the role for the internship and when I started. I just decided to deep dive into studying for the Security Plus, not necessarily to take it right away, but just to kind of again get kind of deep into a wide pool of different facets of the role, and then just kind of see what I would need after starting. And so a lot of companies, again, once you get in, they'll support you in pursuing different certifications or kind of extending your experience and knowledge once you get in there. So that can have a lot of value too, without having to kind of put a lot into it up front.
That's awesome. Yeah, definitely trying to be resourceful and sometimes you have to do your own research. Sometimes you have to go find tools or training options or something like that that's going to help you kind of get to where you want to be or learn the things that you need to learn because it's not always as easy as okay, just read this one page and then you'll know everything that you need to know. Sometimes it's like read like 50 pages of 50 different places and stuff. So the pain is real. So
It's yes, absolutely.
let's see here. Okay, so talking about your job, when it came to applying for jobs, I know you had said that you applied to 40 different roles and you got 2 interviews, I think you said, right?
Correct. Yes.
So, how did you find these jobs in the first place? Were they referrals? Did you go to job boards? Did you go to career fairs? What happened there?
Right. So no referrals. If you've got a referral, I would say put as much into that as you can. I would say, especially being on the other side of it now, my company loves referrals. They love to promote from within. They love to, they're even big on promoting individuals from different, particularly for our company, from warehouses into IT roles, different things like that. So just be aware that maybe even if you know someone at a larger company and maybe they're not in IT, still utilize that connection because they likely have community or in community with individuals that do have a voice into those departments. So definitely utilize referrals. For me, sadly, that was not the case. I definitely kind of came in without having a lot of connections. Um, but definitely when approaching and looking for roles, I knew that, as we had touched on kind of earlier, that remote roles were probably just not going to be an option just because they get so saturated with applications and are just so competitive. And so just basically kind of narrowed my search, different job boards, LinkedIn, even just like local kind of searches for like larger companies. I would even just, for whatever your area you're in, find like the 10 largest companies that are within driving distance of where you'd be willing to go. And I guarantee that they have IT roles that you could apply for. So I basically just did that, made a list of like 10 to 12 large companies in my area. And I was like, even if I get in and it's not specifically the role that I think I'd love to do, it's going to take me that much farther than I am right now. And so, in narrowing that search and then looking online, had opportunities post. Let's see, I think they're bringing on about 50 interns for the summer internship that I ended up being a part of. And there was like maybe 3,000 applicants, I think. So it is still.
Is that just for cybersecurity? Like 50 for just cybersecurity?
So it ended up being, let's see, I think there was 10 of us in the different departments within InfoSec, and there was 50 total within IT. So even if, again, like I said, it wasn't something specific to your role, actually, I didn't even see on there that there were so many different InfoSec ones, and so the one that I applied for wouldn't have necessarily, I thought, had been my first choice. But once I got in there, I was like, oh, okay, this definitely is something I really enjoy doing. So yeah, I would say just, if you're really comfortable on one site and you're looking at, roles on there, I would kind of break out of that and just try to see, kind of look everywhere and see where things are posted and where you can, find more roles.
Are you tired of overpaying for cybersecurity training? Are you interested in training from industry professionals? Are you looking for cybersecurity career services? If you answered yes to any of those questions, then cybertrainingpro.com is the perfect platform for you. At Cybertraining Pro, we're a one-stop shop for all your cybersecurity needs. We can train you for industry certifications or just improve your overall knowledge and skills in a certain area. Unlike other platforms, we don't stop there. We can also coach you throughout your career, practice your interview skills, or create a high-performing resume with our career services. Cybertrainingpro.com isn't just another training platform. Students get exclusive access to our private community where we go beyond training courses to provide additional content, tips and tricks, and engagement with both other students and staff. Look, by the year 2025, there could be as many as 3.5 million job openings in cybersecurity. With so much opportunity, why not maximize your career potential with a platform that cares about your success? Come join us at cybertrainingpro.com and start building your future today.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, internships are absolutely a great way to get your foot in the door. I did an internship, and typically, when you're looking at the entire like employment kind of setup, internships, the bar or the barrier to entry is usually a lot lower than like a full-time employee. Just because it's an internship, it's a different kind of role. And so it's a great place to go learn, to actually talk to people that are on the teams or in the departments and just get an overall understanding. And plus too, like those kind of roles, they're much more prone to like, okay, come shadow me and watch me do my job, come to meetings with me. Like you get more involved than if you were to go to like a full-time job. It's like, that's going to be your job. You're not going to get all these opportunities necessarily to go shadow people and see all the different opportunities that are available. So that is
And I would
awesome.
say that was exactly what this was it's kind of a paid opportunity to expand your skills and ask what you would think are just stupid questions. But it's like, hey, I'm an intern. I'm going to ask the stupid questions. And you realize that like a lot of times you ask the questions and they're like, that's a good one. I'm going to go ahead and look into that with you, you know? So I love the experience of being in that space because it yeah, I was able to go shadow a lot of different teams. I didn't just have to stay kind of put in my little niche. I was able to get around and see all of the different departments, and we interviewed all of the managers to find out more about what their roles are and you know what they get to do in their day to day. And so I think that it is an opportunity to get your foot in the door at the company because I mean, even if it isn't something that works out right away, the majority of the individuals that I worked alongside um, started from internships at one point. So I highly recommend considering them.
Yeah, companies love to hire their interns too, just in case people are wondering. So it's kind of like an early job interview, if you will. So that's good to know. um, so, okay, so your internship, was that on the same team or same area that you work now?
Yes and no. So my original one was with we have a risk and policy team, and so that was the original team I started with. And the first day I showed up and I got my badge and I got into the building, my manager was like, "Hey, I'm not going to have a job for you in a couple of months if you're looking for a job. So I'm going to see if I can get you onto a different team so that hopefully you can make your mark there and have that opportunity." And I was like, "Well, okay." And so there was a little bit of kind of flux for a little bit of just, you know, where I was going to end up. But then I actually, in that, got to work with three different teams, just kind of based off of who was expecting to maybe have some openings towards the end of our internship. The internship was 3 months long. I'm sorry if I didn't say that, but it was 3 months long. And so it gave me a good opportunity also to, we could do projects. So doing some projects that we were able to showcase to leadership and different individuals. They allow us to go through a lot of their materials and see where we can add value. So I was able to, I had mentioned previously that I did video content as a kids pastor during the pandemic. And so they had a lot of video content that they were trying to utilize to communicate different messages on, you know, how they work their risk assessments and different things like that. And so I went through a lot of it and I was like, I think I can add some value here. Can I clean this up? And so there's just different things there where like if you just show that you're a team player, again with the soft skills, you would be surprised how much of your experience outside of information security or IT in general will benefit you huge. I mean, I can confidently say that it was my experience prior um, to this, my working experience, that landed me the job.
That's awesome, especially that he was able to tell you that kind of right up front, and that way you knew kind of going into it that you had to try to get experience or try to interact with these other teams or other areas and really understand what they were doing too. So that's better than being blindsided for sure.
Absolutely, yes.
Cool. So when you were getting your internship, did you have to interview? Did you have to do anything around that, or did they were they just like, we want interns, you match, come on in?
Yeah, it was definitely a bit of a longer process than that. So when I got the initial kind of call back that I had kind of the first, you know, entry interview with the recruiter, they basically went through the standard stuff of like, hey, these are the expectations, and if that's not going to work for you, that's okay, but we have to make sure you're okay with it. And so because there was a lot of students that were traveling from across the country, and so they needed them to know, like, you know, these are your in-office expectations, and this is the term of the internship, and all of that kind of good stuff. So once I kind of went through those rhythms, they reached back out, and there was kind of just a general kind of IT test. Test sounds extreme. It was probably, I don't know, maybe 30 questions. It wasn't anything like sometimes tests like that make me nervous. It was not like that. It was definitely very just kind of basic information and knowledge just to kind of see where you're at to start. And then after going through that level, then it came down to, I had mentioned previously the risk assessment. So They sent over the information, gave us a little less than 48 hours to go through it, but it was a pretty extensive document in working through um, basically a scenario they gave you about, a new software that was going to be deployed. And so just everything that management and executives and, different business owners would need to know just about the prospective risks of this product. And so just took a lot of time to research. It was obviously, open book. So a lot less stress there too, to really make sure that you are kind of getting your mind wrapped around it and you're not missing anything. And so that was kind of, an intensive 48 hours just because I wanted to make sure I got everything in there that I could. And then, gosh, it probably only took them a handful of days to get back after that. And that's when I did an actual interview with the hiring manager. And so did the interview with the hiring manager. And then I think it was less than a week or so later that they let me know that I had a spot. And so it was myself and one other individual. So there's two of us that got picked that were in those departments. And then he also got hired onto the department following the internship.
Awesome. So, with your, well, starting out with your interviews, were those all in person? Were they over the phone, over Zoom? Obviously, like the take home one was take home, but what about the other ones?
Those were all over Zoom. Yeah.
Okay.
And so part of it is also, I had to present the assessment to walk through it. He gave me just kind of some basic guidance on, what I should focus on when walking through it. So I would just get comfortable with the fact that, again, like you had mentioned, if you expect to kind of be like hiding in a dark corner and not engaging with people and work in this industry, that's just not going to happen. I know this because I talked with individuals on our um, threat intelligence team, pen testing teams, and they definitely have to get in the rhythm of communicating maybe some really technical things to people who don't work in that. And so being able to translate this in a way that people can understand is really valuable. And so, even if you're just having conversations with your friends or members of your family and you're talking through things, I would encourage you to just explain it to them what you're doing because it's really interesting. Like this industry is very interesting and it's in the news all the time. And a lot of people just don't even understand um, what it entails or who's working in the background for something. Um, Even the other day, like my son remarked over like an update that happened on his phone and he's just like, hey, look at this new feature. And I'm like, if you only knew like what went into play in order for them to release that update, like, so yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, the interview processes are so interesting and they vary so much between some companies. Like, I remember some of the interviews that I've been on, especially pre-pandemic. I had panel interviews. Actually, I had several panel interviews that I had to go on. The panel interviews, especially if there's like multiple of them, they drive me crazy. But sometimes these companies will have multiple rounds, like a lot of rounds. I've heard just nightmare stories of some companies just having constantly long interview processes. I had one that was like all day with like five different people, and it was like an hour each or something. Like,
Yikes.
ah, brutal. But
I think some of those can say a lot about the company as well. So like, take that into account as you're going through the process of like, how they engage you in these interviews might be a lot of what it will be like to work for that company as well. So keep that in mind.
yeah, and it's so sad because like some of the ones that I had that were just like really bad, like the really long ones, they were with some like really well-known companies. I was so disappointed. I was so sad. I was like, I just can't, I cannot work for you. Like this is terrible. So your internship was all on site as well, right?
It was hybrid.
Oh, okay, cool. So, um, so when they were going to, well, basically when you were getting converted into a full-time employee, so you had got the full-time job, in that process, did you have to interview for that? Were they able to just convert you over to a full-time employee? How did that whole process work?
Yeah, luckily for me, because of one of the three departments I was assisting had open roles and headcounts within their departments, I didn't have to go through another interview process. I'd kind of already done an interview with the director, or we call them our skip levels. And so gotten to know him and had kind of a soft interview, like already being there. But then basically in the transition, did basically a full write up of like what I contributed since I had been there and just basically hit a lot of highlights. And that was part of it. But I luckily did not have to interview again. They do internally post a lot of different, departments that are hiring. And so should that have not worked out, to transition in that way, there was a lot of other departments that were looking for help. And I think that that still would have been a pretty soft interview process and not too heavy.
Gotcha. Kind of circling back real quick for your interview. So, like when you were going into that, your initial interview with like your internship interviews, did you do anything specific to prepare for those?
Yeah, I think it's Madeline Mann. She has like a bunch of different courses on going through interviews and how to prepare for interviews. So I think I probably put almost as much, like especially towards the end, almost as much effort into making sure that I was interviewing well, um, as in being sharp, kind of in the different tools I was trying to utilize or learn from. So yes, I definitely was trying to learn from individuals that are kind of in that world all the time. A lot of the roles I'd had before that, I had gotten through relationship and referral. So I don't think I had to like necessarily sell myself as much in interviewing and getting a foot in the door. But with this one, with not having relationship and not having, the academic world kind of behind me and that degree kind of coming up behind me, I knew that I really had to interview well. And so I would say I couldn't emphasize that enough of just feeling really comfortable in promoting yourself and sharing about your wins in previous roles and finding different ways that you can communicate how they would translate into the role that you're applying for sure.
Awesome. So that course the courses you had done, were those specific to like risk management or cybersecurity or information security, or were they just like about interviewing and crushing interviews?
Uh, the ones I had just mentioned were totally focused on interviewing. Yeah. So I had watched a lot of your videos on interviewing for technical interviews, and this has been a lot to play with the first role that I had interviewed with because that one was a lot more of a technical interview. Um, Whereas this one, a lot of the technical was not, kind of on the spot with an individual. That was test taking, and so that one felt a little bit less kind of pressure. But yeah, I would definitely hone in on your interviewing skills so you could present yourself well.
So next question. So throughout your journey so far, let's talk about like mentoring or any kind of like coaching or any people like that have been in your journey so far, or that are kind of evolving into that role for you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so I connected with you and you helped me probably maybe a week before I had gotten a call from this company to walk through that process. You had gone through my resume with me, which was hugely beneficial because I felt like I had spent a lot of time. Obviously, you look at your own resume and after a while, you're like, "Ah, I just can't even look at it anymore. I don't know." And I just needed somebody who had like the technical mindset to look at it and be like, this is garbage. You need to toss that out. Or like, yeah, I would move this up or change that around. And that was so beneficial to be able to feel like I was presenting kind of a lot more of a well-crafted resume. So I would say that that was kind of the main kind of one-on-one. And then besides that, for kind of mentorship and support. The boot camp that I went to, they were really big on kind of the career aspect and supporting individuals as they were applying. So they did a lot of coaching on technical interviews and on crafting your resume, different things like that. So those are probably the two main things that helped me before I got the position.
Awesome. Yeah, that's, you know, what a lot of people don't realize is that, yeah, there's like the cybersecurity aspect of things and like the actual technical or non-technical knowledge about the career field. But then there's also the career aspect, which sometimes doesn't have anything necessarily to do with cybersecurity. It's, how's your resume formatted? How do you answer interview questions? Like all these other things, maybe like the strategy of your career. And again, not all of them have really anything to do with cybersecurity, but they're things that you may or may not know, or they can take a while to kind of learn. And it's not as enjoyable to learn things the hard way sometimes, especially if it's a difference between like getting a job or not getting a job, right? And so that's awesome to hear. I know we had talked about it a little bit before, so I'm definitely glad that I was able to help you in that pursuit, and that also your boot camp helped too. Because I hate seeing when boot camps they just focus on the technical aspects because they, of all people, should know better, right? Like they shouldn't just be doing a technical program without any kind of like guidance. But we see it, so
Yeah, yeah. And so I had mentioned there's another individual that had that basically I worked alongside the whole internship, and he did go through kind of the full back to college experience, but it didn't feature as much kind of getting in there and getting kind of your hands dirty in some of the technical aspects. It was more theoretical. And so I would say if in whatever you're doing, if it doesn't involve kind of a more kind of a balanced kind of approach to learning where you don't feel like you're actually getting in and you're messing around with things and trying to break things and at least kind of getting in there a little bit, I would push yourself to do it on the side.
absolutely. It's one of those career fields where you have to kind of go above and beyond. You can't just necessarily do the minimum and expect to get the results that everybody's trying to get or that everybody talks about. So
Right.
absolutely. So next question. So based on your career so far, what's been the biggest challenge or challenges that you've faced so far?
I would say in starting, you're going to battle just feeling like the whole imposter syndrome thing of like, oh my goodness, I don't know what I'm talking about. And they're asking me to present to, like, I had to do a presentation in front of our CISO. And I was like, oh, that makes me pretty uncomfortable. I don't really know about that. And so you're going to be getting into a lot of things that make you feel uncomfortable. But I guess pushing through it as much as you can to know that, like, everybody starts somewhere and this industry changes so much that everybody is always learning. I mean, you're surrounded by a bunch of learners if they've stayed in this industry for any length of time. And so I would say biggest challenge is definitely finding like the confidence within yourself to just kind of continue to push forward even when you're maybe lacking in confidence. And I feel like that presents really well too. I mean, people love to see individuals that project that confidence. So I would say if you struggle with that, it would be important for you to try to either, find someone that you can talk to that's like a safe person, whether it be a friend or maybe it's like a schoolmate or somebody like that where you can kind of go back and forth and kind of like give each other pep talks and work through things. I would say honestly that's been the biggest thing to push through because um, as far as like the day to day workings of my role, it um, it let's see, there's a lot of kind of building and momentum you'll get as you go, and they know that, so they don't expect that you start and you know everything. They expect that you're going to start and you're going to just really get solid at kind of the foundations and the basics. And so for my level in particular, a lot of what we deal in is more low risk, moderate risk. And so it's just getting really comfortable kind of in understanding, like we mentioned, a lot of the frameworks, a lot of the different attestations that are out there. So for me, I do a lot of technical reports and I do a lot of reading. But then sometimes some fun stuff will pop up where it's not, I shouldn't say fun stuff, but it's fun for us, right? Where it's like, hey, we've heard of these, we have this whole list of, potential third parties that have been breached. Can you go and look and see if we've assessed them and if we have any information? So then you still get kind of some of that, like, you get to investigate and dig into things a little bit. So I guess be confident and know that they don't expect you in starting in, like for me, a level 1 role. They don't expect you to know and be able to operate like somebody that's been in the industry for a long time. And so you don't have to pretend like you are. You can, again, ask those questions that maybe you're afraid to ask, but they want you to ask them and they want you to be proactive in learning and growing in your role.
Absolutely. So we've talked about a whole bunch of different stuff in this interview, a lot of great information that I'm positive people are going to get a lot of value out of. But as far as like final thoughts, what would be, one thing or a couple things that you would give to somebody that's in the same kind of shoes that you were in as you were trying to get into cybersecurity?
So I would say consider a role in GRC. I'm just going to like pump up this area because it is even if you start there and you're here or you're in that space for maybe a year, the opportunity for you to just cherry pick something from there is definitely just kind of there for the taking. But I just think that it brings so much kind of continued value to your learning process because you have to start looking at things with more of that like kind of questioning mindset where we're always like a little suspicious about things. And so it really kind of builds and strengthens your muscles as far as how we have to think in this industry in general. And so I would say definitely consider roles like that because previous experience, non-tech related experience, the doors kind of open. Like I said, I've worked with somebody who used to be a buyer, individuals that used to work in nonprofit sectors, someone who was an auditor outside of the security. So it's just like such a just like crazy different background of people all getting into security. And so I would say consider those roles because they are just like an open door to other areas.
Awesome. Great advice. And like I said, I mean, there was a ton of great information in this interview that I'm sure that people are going to be able to get a lot of value out of. And with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. I hope that you've enjoyed this interview. I know that a lot of people had similar questions or wanted to hear from people that were in similar situations that they're in. And so this is just one of those things that I really wanted to put out here so people could get the answers for somebody who has been in the situation that you're likely in. Use this information to help you get to where you want to be. And until next time, I'll see you later.